Hi, this is Guillermo del Toro, and I welcome you to the director's commentary track for the UK edition of The Devil's Backbone. This movie came to me at a very important time in my life. I had just finished being brutally raped in a in a fantastic studio experience in America, and I decided that I needed to regain my balance as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, and this movie came to me almost like a miracle. I'll tell you a little more about it in a second. Right now, I would like to just call your attention briefly to the fact that this movie is constructed in a rhyming structure. In other words, has elements that mirror each other throughout the film. The film opens like it closes, with a narration, the exact narration almost, with one single variation at the end. The images that are used to illustrate that narration, though, change. It was my idea or my desire that hopefully after seeing the movie, if you ever watch it again, this opening prologue would actually be far more significant, and all the images would gain new meaning. The idea was that if I constructed the movie to rhyme, then the images would gain more weight, like this image of a kid on the edge of the water, which is repeated 2 times in the movie. There are 2 kids floating in the water. The fetuses in the jars echo the dead boy floating inside of the pool. The pool is the same color as the water of the fetuses floating there. There are 2 characters that start with the letter C. Actually more. All the good guy characters that start with the letter C. Carmen, Conchita, Casares, and Carlos. And there are 2 characters that start that are initialed with the letter J. Jacinto and Jaime. The bully and the proto-fascist caretaker of the orphanage. And the idea was that these characters meant something to each other or were somewhat related. Jacinto, the caretaker, is in essence the future, one of the possible futures of Jaime. If Jaime had continued unchecked, he would have turned into this same character, the proto-fascist Jacinto plays. And there are also other mirroring things. Aside from actually a couple of scenes in front of mirrors, there is 2 love stories, unrequited love stories in the movie. One is the love story between Jaime, the bully, and Conchita, the cook. The other one is the love story of Casares and Carmen. The older professor and the older headmistress of the school and the orphanage, and so on and so forth. There is the idea, or there is the hope that this mirroring rhyming structure would create some sense of rhythm, almost poetic rhythm to the movie. And for those of you that are gonna purchase or watch this movie right after or right before Pan's Labyrinth, you will notice something very interesting, at least to me it's interesting, is that this movie, Devil's Backbone, and the movie Pan's Labyrinth are built to structurally rhyme with each other. In other words, in Pan's Labyrinth, you have the elements of the opening narration and the closing narration. You have the elements of the arrival of the kid to a building that is going to hold the magical event. And you have the first night visitation and the first night exploration of the underside, the dark side of that building in both movies. And there are many other similarities between the 2, although at the end of the day, they are very different films. The experiment with Devil's Backbone was to try and transpose the essence of the gothic romance or the gothic novel towards an absolutely insane setting, a setting that had nothing to do with that tradition. And that setting was Spain in 1939, right at the end of the Spanish Civil War. Usually Gothic romances and Gothic movies take place in ancient buildings, Gothic buildings or Gothic revival buildings, Victorian settings, and they feed on darkness and humid climate, really rainy, stormy skies and so forth, and to transpose it to this setting, which is almost like a Western type of setting, it was quite a crazy experiment. By the way, the numbers on that bomb, if you watch carefully, they have a special meaning. They contain partially numbers from my home address in Mexico and the initials of my wife and I, or nicknames actually. Anyway, the idea for this movie was to take all those beats. The Gothic romance is born essentially in the middle of the 18th century, around the 1760s, with the novel The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole. This officially gives birth to the Gothic romance. And the Gothic romance tries to establishes a series of beats that will be repeated from one novel, from one movie to the next. One of the essential elements of the Gothic romance is the haunted building, the haunted building in which the drama will take place. In the case of the Castle of Otranto, obviously, is the building that the title references. And in the Castle of Otranto, the novel opens with a gigantic, massive helmet, a knight's helmet, landing in the middle of the patio. And this helmet will remain there as a reminder of a terrible crime that occurred in the past. Obviously, you can see in this movie that element, the helmet or the reminder of the tragedy in the middle of the patio. It's actually the bomb that fell the very night of the crime. So you see it there in the background, and we'll talk more about her in a minute. But this bomb lands in the middle of there and remains there as a reminder of what the crime that occurred in the past. This is another element common to most Gothic romances. A secret, a terrible secret that comes from the past to haunt the hero, the heroine that will solve it eventually. This is a third element of the Gothic romance, the pure hero, quote unquote. The hero or heroine that arrives to that building, and it's a pure of heart. And this pure of heart hero needs to solve a mystery, a crime, a terrible crime from the past throughout his or her experience. Now, the other elements in the Gothic romance that are important and that were translated little by little were the exploration of an underground series of tunnels, trappings, a maze, a labyrinth, that exists underneath the castle, the subterranean nature of a building, the world beneath the exterior world. And this is again transposed very accurately in Devil's Backbone. What is interesting is to take all this and set it in the sunlight, set it out in the sunlight, and try to follow these things. This right there in the screen, there is a fifth element in the Gothic romance. Very often there is a treasure, a gold treasure hidden, and it will be obtained as a result of the adventure. But mostly this Gothic romance is inspired by the desire of going beyond appearance, beyond what looks like a normal everyday life lurks a terrible secret, a terrible existence. Now, the movie is structured to be sort of a brutal rite of passage movie. Many of the elements and the episodes in the movie are based on childhood events of my childhood. I grew up in a Jesuit. I went to Jesuit school, and going to Jesuit school is as close as I can imagine of going to prison. You have the entire system against you, and then within the school you have all the other kids fighting for position, and this little skirmishes in the movie, and the fact that Jaime, the bully, eventually is revealed to be a good guy haunted by a secret, they all come from my personal experience. I saw many a mortal fight in that Jesuit schoolyard. I mean, literally, I saw kids stab each other with compasses or hit each other with big flat boards with rusty nails on the edge. And I was always afraid to go back to school because I knew one day, given the right elements, I would be killed. And this sense of mortality is completely fake to the adults. They never pay attention to you as a kid. You are nothing but a strange nuisance. And as a kid, you have the feeling that the danger is very real, that the danger of dying or being killed would be very real, but that if it happened, the other adults would justify it as they were playing. These kids, they didn't mean no harm, and the kid died by accident. They were just playing. The reference to the Count of Monte Cristo is very important for me. I mean, I'd like characters that are constructed little by the way they interact with other characters in a movie. I don't like characters that talk about themselves that much. The fact that this kid loves books is referenced only in the fact that he carries his books and he's reading the Count of Monte Cristo. I don't need to make a point again and again about it in the film because his own imagination and his own vivid sense of place and the way he observes his surroundings will tell you this is a very smart kid. I don't need to have a conversation about it. I just want to show you. I think that sometimes in show business, we end up being into tell business, telling you about things instead of showing you things. When I studied screenplay writing, my teacher used to tell us, show me what the character is. Show me how the character interacts with his environment. Don't tell me about it. And here, the movie takes this starts to take this little turn towards what I call almost like a prison movie dynamics, in which the hero is introduced to his environment, which will become very hostile at a point, and he has to make peace with it little by little. And this again marries us with the Gothic romance. It's a strange mixture because Gothic romance also introduces the innocent hero into an environment that will be quite oppressive or quite aggressive with him or her. And here you have the prison dynamics at their best. The little moment in which the duel of the two kids is established. And these two kids will grow up to be friends, but not for now. One of the things I like to do is not to trace the characters the usual way they are traced in screenplays. For example, this guy, Jaime, who starts as the bully, will transform into a good guy, and you will learn that he is also the victim of a secret and that he is actually propelled by guilt to be such a bully. I think that this is important because normally in an American movie, good guys are good guys, bad guys are bad guys, and that is that. And I like as much as I can in the movies to give a darker side to the hero and give a more human side to the villain. Even Jacinto, who is played by Eduardo Noriega, the caretaker, he is really just a very frightened child. He's a very, very scared boy. A boy that dreamt he would be a prince when he was a child, and in reality can't accept the fact that he's just a poor sap, a working class guy. He would love to be rich, to get out of there because he feels he's better than anyone else. And here we start hinting at things. I love keys as objects. I use them in as many moments in my movies as I can. I love keys, keyholes, eyes, umbrellas, insects, gears, and all these things are recurring. This moment where he lights off the cigarette is important for me because I also have this character lie. Most characters in movies don't lie, and both in Pan's Labyrinth and Devil's Backbone, the bad guy says a simple lie. In Devil's Backbone is, "Do you have a cigarette?" And he says no. And the fact that he doesn't want to share that cigarette with them is important. It defines his character, you know. And here you see how he thinks about himself as better than the rest of them, better than this environment, how he wishes he could break out of here. This guy is in enormous pain and he hates himself above anyone else, just like the fascist in Pan's Labyrinth. And we see, again, all the actions in the movie, all the mysteries, all the little elements, all the little stories are intertwined around this object, around this reminder of the tragedy, which is the bomb. The bomb becomes as much a character as any of the other characters in the movie, by the way it sounds, by the way it looks, by the fact that all those ribbons that the kids tied to her are animated and become almost sentient at one point in the movie. And here we come to another thing that Pan's Labyrinth and Devil's Backbone have in common, which is the first night visitation. The first night visitation is important to me because as a kid I saw monsters in my bedroom, and it was always the loneliest, scariest time was usually at night. When I was alone in my bed in my grandmother's house, and I would be visited by monsters that came from behind the armoire or behind the chair or from under the bed. And I think nighttime is the moment where creatures emerge from inside of you and come out into the world. And this is an element that is very important in Gothic romance. Gothic romance comes right at a time where reason and classicism are valued, and it comes as a reaction, as an offspring of the Romantic movement. The Romantic movement valued emotion over reason more than anything, and when you annul reason, then, in the words of as Goya quotes in his engravings, the sleep of reason produces monsters. And there are two things for me that are the sleep of reasons. Obviously, at night, when you're alone, emotion gives way and takes over reason. But also, war. War is the absolute lack of reason, and that's why war produces monsters. And that's why these two movies, Pan's Labyrinth and Devil's Backbone, have to occur in a time of war. Because when war happens, monsters, imaginary or real, come to life. The fact that Gothic romance values emotion over reason is also important, defining it, because it's a very political genre. It's a very anarchic genre. It goes against convention. It goes against structure. It goes against the establishment. The Marquis de Sade appreciated Gothic romance, and he believed that it was a response to the revolutionary times of the 18th century. He obviously Otranto preceded some of the most convulsed events, but it was the belief of the Marquis de Sade that the Romantic movement was ultimately an act of rebellion against the good conscience, the establishment, the nice, acceptable behavior of society, and the valuing of reason. I think that part of it comes from the fascination with ruins and buildings, as we talked about, and the fact that the building lodges all this drama, and that the deepest secret and the most important secret of all is lodged in the gut of the building, in the very inside of the building, in the center of the labyrinth, so to speak, is very symbolic for me, because to me the buildings in the Gothic romance are the head of the characters, the body of the characters, and all the monsters that inhabit within are almost like a trip to the very center of the id, to the subconscious. We see the drama that occurs inside our heads, inside the building, inside our soul. The buildings in Gothic romance are, by definition, very old ruins, very old buildings, because the first Gothic romance ever written, Castle of Otranto, was done in response to Walpole's fascination with ruins, with the ancient Gothic architecture ruins. Gothic architecture, by the way, was a very spiritual type of architecture. It was an architecture that aspired to have spiritual values. It pitted light against darkness. It pitted light against shadow. And it was, for example, a Gothic church is full of symbols. The masons, the carvers of the churches left many hidden symbol or many a hidden meaning within the stones of those cathedrals, and many people have called them stone books, because within their stones, within their carved stone masonry, are held secrets, alchemical, spiritual, hermetic knowledge passed on by one generation to another. These buildings, these Gothic structures, also have these long, tall arches and long, tall columns, trying to give not only a sense of scale for man, and representing how insignificant man is in a holy environment, for example, in a Gothic church, but also because the pillars and the arches seem to point towards heavens, towards the spiritual. And the fact that in this same church you have saints and light and shadow and arches and gargoyles, it's very important to not only the Gothic appearance of a building, but to the meaning of it, and to how it gives birth to a convulsed, beautiful genre like the Gothic romance. Because in the Gothic romance you will have saints and gargoyles living side to side in light and in shadow in the same building. This passage is one of my favorite passages in the movie, because it's if you time it, it's an extremely long first night excursion into exploring the underground of the place, of the building, and it's full of little symbols that I find disquieting and eerie, like these scissors and knives that are hanging in the kitchen. They are just used as foreground objects, but there's something vaguely fairy tale-esque about them. They are oversized, giant scissors that were used in butcher shops to cut the bones of animals. And I like to put them there in the foreground, almost like as if this was an ogre's kitchen, And this is going to lead through the doorway, another great symbol, into the underbelly of the building. And here we enact a little bit of the mystery. Another important element in Gothic romance is the secret passages, the hiding things, the hidden doors, secret passages, things that are not apparent at first. And this is therefore a very important moment, because we reveal that behind the facade of this regular kitchen there is a hidden treasure, which is in this box, in this vault. And here he is trying the key. Every single element in this movie adds up little by little. You see him get the key. He's trying it. Now, we saw Carmen give the kid another key for his locker room, and we see that he is the one that holds all the keys, the one that keeps all the keys for the entire building. How does Jacinto, the caretaker, gets them, we will find out in a few minutes. But the method by which he gets them, the secrets that all the characters keep from each other, is what create the sense of a Gothic romance. The Gothic romance peaked with The Monk by Matthew G. Lewis, a beautiful novel, which, by the way, is set in Spain, and that to me is probably the best Gothic romance I've ever read. It's very, very, very anti-clerical, fiercely so, and it's truly anarchic. It really fulfills what the Marquis de Sade used to say. This is a genre that is destined to cause upheaval in society. It really creates indignation, irritation amongst the good Catholics. Now the genre peaks and then becomes almost a parody of itself, and it degenerates rapidly into Gothic romance, where the word romance is emphasized as a sappy sort of Fabio cover, muscled heroes kidnapping heroines in the night, and it really loses most of its meaning, or it is transmutated. It transforms into quirks and little winks and nods that you can find in many a novel. Wuthering Heights, the Bronte sisters' writings, or even in a lot of passages of, for example, Charles Dickens. Dickens has a lot of Gothic trappings in his novels. He has the buildings, the orphanages, the prisons, kids in danger, pure white heroines facing evildoers of enormous stature. Sykes, Uriah Heep. Any of the bad guys in Dickens could very well be at home in a Gothic romance, in a Gothic novel. And this is another influence that I have in my work. I really cherish Dickens, and I love his point of view about childhood. Childhood is not at all a benign, beautiful, happy time for Dickens. Childhood is a dangerous, mortal, fragile time for to exist in. And I share that view. I unfortunately share that view, and I believe that I have spent most of my adult life recuperating from my first 10 years of existence. I think that my happiest time has been from my mid-20s to my early 40s, because the rest of the time, growing up into becoming a young adult, I truly was deeply unhappy. And here we have one of the things that where Devil's Backbone sort of subverts the Gothic romance in a strange way. The ghost heeds a warning right here. Many of you will die. Now, normally, and within the working structure of the film, this is a dire warning. But in reality, it turns out to be a concerned warning. The ghost is not promising that many will die. He's not being menacing. He is being helpful. He is being concerned, and he is warning them that many will die eventually, not by his hand, but by the hand of Jacinto. The ghost in Devil's Backbone is meant to be not so much scary, but to become a tragic figure as the movie progresses. So the idea of the ghost as an enemy, the monster as an enemy, is diffused as the movie advances. I like in my movies for the monsters to be our friends, and I like for the worst monster in my movies to actually be a human being. The worst monster in Devil's Backbone is not the ghost. The scariest thing in Devil's Backbone is Jacinto, the caretaker, who is very much human. So, as the movie progresses, it loses that element, the the ghost is shown very early in the movie, precisely to diffuse this scariness. You know, I wanted the ghost to become another orphan, to become a sad little boy that wants his death avenged. And here we tap into another element of the Gothic romance. You know, the sins of the fathers or the crime in the past needs to be avenged, needs to be righted. You know, and in righting that wrong, in changing that crime from the past, we see the hero or heroine mend the world that then apparently turns normal again. Not so in Devil's Backbone. In Devil's Backbone, and as I will show you at the end, nothing has a happy resolution. It's all tough. It's all tough compromises in Devil's Backbone. Here you have a scene in the mirror. There will be several others, again related to romance and unrequited love. But I wanted very much to show the relationship between these two characters of the headmistress and the old professor. You know, how they would have been a wonderful couple if only they had the presence of mind to talk to each other. In the movie, all the adult characters are incomplete. They're lacking a leg or lacking something, you know, like the old professor is the perfect romantic lead. He's handsome, he's distinguished, he's elegant, he's caring. Unfortunately, he also is a coward, and an impotent coward at that. You know, he doesn't dare to fire the gun. He doesn't dare to make love to the woman he loves. And she, the headmistress, she's a very strong woman, a very liberal woman, but she doesn't have a leg. You know, Jacinto is handsome and sexually powerful, but he doesn't have a heart. And what I try to say in the movie is that out of their lackings, the kids, all the boys, bond together. And when they bond together, they form a stronger self, you know. And I'm not talking about a joining of forces. I'm talking about a joining of weaknesses. That's what I think makes the only complete human being in the movie. All the kids together form the only strong unity in the movie. You know, they show you that all the adults are incomplete, but them together can vanquish adversity. I think that this passage and the following movements in the film are the turning point between the relationships of the kids. You know, here Jaime thinks that Carlos betrayed them all, but we're gonna learn that he didn't, and their friendship will start little by little gaining significance. This taking out of the Christ, this putting Christ in the patio, is because obviously the right wing was winning in Spain. In '39, the war was going to the side of the right. You know, this particular war, is very tragic, and you know, it's a war that is a prelude, a prologue to World War II. You know, you have a coup d'état by the right, taking over the Republican government, usurping the government, a military coup that should have been dealt with by the international community, but wasn't, because everybody was afraid of upsetting the balance in Europe. You know, the alliances with Europe, even fascistic Europe, were very strong, and they were afraid of, for example, upsetting Hitler. The fact is that then Hitler and Mussolini, I mean both Italy and Germany, used the Spanish Civil War as a testing ground for new tactics and new weapons that very shortly thereafter will be put to use in World War II. And the fact, again, is that after tiptoeing around them, in 1939, just as the Civil War ends, a few months later, Hitler invades Poland. And that essentially gives birth to World War II. I think that there was a funny little wink and a nod over there. I wanted to have a mechanical frog in Devil's Backbone, and this frog will later be a real frog in Pan's Labyrinth. These are little things that rhyme between the two movies. The use of the keys, the frogs, the mirror scenes, etc., etc. I hope one day you can watch them together. And here's the sex scene between the old professor and the headmistress of the orphanage. Sex scene, a pinky, heavy, sweaty, pinky sex between the two. I think that it's a beautiful, very tragic, very romantic relationship these two have, and it'll culminate in one of my favorite scenes in the movie, which is him reciting a poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson. Here we have an almost exact echo, an almost exact mirror moment of a kid next to the water. I think that horror movies, fantasy movies are rich with symbols, and symbols like the water, the underground, as I said, the keys, the knives, doorways, and so on and so forth, that should remain unexplained, that should just be constructed like a symbol system that gives you, to each audience member, gives a different symbol, a different meaning. Here you have another kid in the pool, falling in the pool, bleeding, another kid that falls in the pool, that is echoed later in the film, and frankly, I think that this is a moment that comes purely out of Tom Sawyer, out of Mark Twain. How kids that seemingly come from totally different backgrounds will bond, trying to unite against the adults, or trying to form their own little band together. Here, the idea that the ghost lives down there, that he dwells down there, that he's tied to the pool, is essential to what I understand a ghost is. One of the best definitions of what a ghost is comes from Nigel Neal, the British writer, and it comes from a TV movie that I saw called The Stone Tape, written by Neal. Nigel Neal had this incredible approach to supernatural things that seemed to fuse the rational and the irrational. He tried to utilize a pseudo-logical approach to the most outlandish things on Earth. And I remember essentially the Stone Tapes saying that homes, haunted houses, haunted buildings are stone tapes that recorded a tragedy, that recorded a terrible event and replayed it again and again and again. That is essentially what Nigel Neal says is a ghostly occurrence. What is incredibly scary is that ghostly occurrence, that presence, can have a conscience, can have a knowing, and that it knows you are there, and it knows that it is playing just for you. Nigel Neal used to also note in the Stone Tapes that not all of us are quote unquote players. We cannot replay this tape, all of us. I could be standing in the same room as another person and I see a ghost, and the other person next to me does not see a ghost. Which brings us to the most modern acception of the Gothic tale, which is Stephen King's The Shining, for example. Where Stephen King maintains the idea that evil buildings, evil places attract evil people. And tragic places will attract tragedy again and again and again. This is obviously true in Devil's Backbone, where the tragedy that is contained, the horror that is contained in the building, will only bear fruits that are equally tragic and equally horrible. The idea of a ghost for me is summed up in the opening and in the closing of the film. It's all of the above. It's like an insect trapped in amber that looks alive, that seems to be alive but is not. And that is a cardinal rule in all horror films, in all horror literature. Horror is what should not be, but is. In other words, there is, for example, the idea that there are certain images that are per se scary. I disagree. Horror is about context. You need to know what should be in order to be scared of what is there but shouldn't be there. I'll give you an example. You are walking down a corridor and you see your father turn the corner and walk towards you extending his arms. Well, that's a perfectly normal image, a perfectly normal moment. But allow me to give you context. Your father is dead. He died 10 years ago. So the moment your father appears there and walks towards you is absolutely terrifying, because horror depends on context. That's why in the movies I make, I give as much value to context as I do to content. I don't do these things accidentally. This movie wouldn't be the same one if it was in 1934, 1933, right at the beginning of the Spanish Civil War, or in 1936. It needs to occur at the end of the war, in 1939. Why? Because I think that this is a story, a microcosmos of the Spanish Civil War. The movie is built or constructed to work as a microcosmos of the Spanish Civil War. The building is Spain, and each of the characters in the building represents a side of Spain. The caretaker represents the fascists that believe they are better and more entitled than the rest of the people that inhabit the building. They should be better, they should be richer, they should be more powerful. And this emotional disfranchisement, this emotional distance from all the other people that inhabit the same building, that live side by side with them, this is what allows them to be cruel to their fellow man. This is what allows them to shoot them, kill them, maim them, because they're not the same. We are not equal, is, I think, the unspoken motto of the fascist movement. We are not all created equal. And in this microcosmos of the Spanish Civil War, you see the old republic, which is well-meaning, but ultimately impotent or flawed, like the old professor or the headmistress, Carmen, and you have the kids, which essentially are the rest of the people, the Spaniard people. They have to unite to fight against this brutality that encircles them. This is a second mirror scene. A second mirror scene completely different from the other one, but that echoes each other, and I think that it was very important for me that the object of the love of the intellectual, Carmen, who is the object of the love of the intellectual, is very sexual, that she needs the flesh to survive, and here you see him putting back the old key and taking the new key. This is how he gets the keys. This is the coin of the trade for this guy. He's going to have a physical relationship with her in exchange for the keys. I actually find this moment to be very tender, very sweet. I call it the amputated Cinderella moment, because it's the prince trying the slipper, it's him tying her leg, completing her. But it's a painful, painful love story. It's an incestuous, very incestuous love story between her and this kid, and much as she hates him, much as she hates to do this with him, she needs it. It's painful, but she needs it. I remember Pedro Almodovar telling me about this scene, saying, this is your first love scene in your movies. He says, you are capable of murdering dozens and dozens of people, but you cannot show two people fucking. And he was right. He was absolutely right. I am ultimately, I think I was, I don't think I am anymore, but I was a bit of a Catholic, ex-Catholic choir boy about these things. But now I've done my amputee sex scene. I am free of guilt. And you can see here, again, a mirror scene, and how the elements repeat with each other, echo each other. Pedro Almodovar, going back to what I said on the beginning of the movie, Pedro Almodovar and this movie came to me at a very, very auspicious moment. I had just, I met Pedro actually right after I did Kronos. I met him in the Miami Film Festival. I was sitting by the pool, drinking a Diet Coke, and out of the blue I hear a voice, and he says, "Are you Guillermo del Toro?" I turn, and it was Pedro Almodovar, whom I admired very much. At that time, my two favorite filmmakers were David Lynch and Almodovar. And Almodovar tells me, "I saw Kronos, and I would love to produce your next movie." And of course I was flabbergasted, and I then proceeded to almost ruin my career by doing Mimic. And after Mimic, I felt so bad, I felt so damaged, that I needed to retreat into making a movie that I fully controlled myself. And after Mimic, I talked to my producing partner, Berto Navarro, and we founded a company called Tequila Gang. And what Tequila Gang tried to do was to become a vehicle for me to be able to produce my more personal films, my more free films, where I was not dependent on a studio or American financing or anything like that. And we approached Almodovar and we said, would you be interested in doing this movie? And I pitched him the movie. And he said, how are you going to marry the ghost story and the Civil War story? He couldn't understand, and I explained to him something that was very basic for me. I said, we're going to have Sergio Leone days, and Mario Bava nights. We're going to have this hot, baked, almost sepia exterior daylights, and we're going to have this cold, creepy, eerie, mysterious nights. And the building will change at night. The same scenario, the same setting will change at night. And, you can see it in the movie, how at night the building becomes an eerie place. By the way, the entrance to the building, the doorway with the two holes on the sides, the big doorway, it's a quote, an exact architectural quote to Mario Bava's Kill Baby Kill. Just for those of you that are curious, go watch Kill Baby Kill and you see that same entrance. We built this. Let me tell you about the building, since it's one of the main characters in the movie, let me tell you a little bit about it. This interior, this patio, and the classrooms, this used to be a school, government school outside of Madrid. The outside of the building that you're about to see when the car exits actually is built in a completely separate set, miles and miles, about 2 hours away from Madrid, and we used it to show people coming in and out of the building because we couldn't use the same building for everything. This is built 2 hours away. And by the way, the guy closing the door is not Eduardo Noriega. It is my second assistant director, who Noriega had another movie and he left us to go and do that movie, and he obviously I had to use my second assistant director. Before I continue, I'll make a parenthesis and tell you this is a very important scene because this is where she tells them about the primitive men hunting together, joining forces against a horrible enemy that was the mammoth, and that's exactly what they're gonna do eventually in the film, joined forces to kill the mammoth with lances. So this scene, quote unquote, pays off or renders fruit a little later. The third part of the building, which is the cellar, the basement of the building, was actually shot in another building about 2 hours away from Madrid. Very close, by the way, to where I shot Pan's Labyrinth. You know, the set pieces in Pan's Labyrinth were built very close to the place where I shot the underground buildings, the underground cellar in Devil's Backbone. So these three buildings, the school, the facade, and the cellar, joined together, they form the building. Now, the building is meant to feel isolated from the war. You see the huge plain, the desert plain outside, and this building in the middle of nowhere. And apparently, the people in the building feel that the war is distant. As you may notice in the film, there's only one wartime scene, which is about to come right now. And that's all there is. So in theory, the war is out there in the world, but not in the building. And the movie tries to prove that the war touches us, no matter how far we are, anecdotically. You know, the war will be reenacted within this building. Everything, people will die, there will be explosions, there will be violence, there will be people shot, all within the building. Because the spirit of war, the ghost of war, the phantasm of war, permeates the building, even if it's technically, geographically so far away from it. I try to show that the consequences of war know no boundaries. This is a little nice touch. When I was talking about the adults being incomplete, I was also referring to the fact that Casares was impotent, and what you can see here is that he sells this potion, this strange potion of the fetuses, to give potency, you know. And he is a man of science supposedly, but he is so incongruous with his own beliefs that he drinks the potion. After explaining how irrational all that is, he has to drink it because just in case superstition has something, he wants his potency. And this is the only moment of war in the movie. The summary execution of the guardian of Carlos, the one that took him to the building. And it's all done in one shot. You know, I try to do in my Spanish movies, I try to preserve the integrity of the shot as much as possible. I try to not cut that much. I value the weight of each of the shots. And I try to orchestrate them a little bit like a ballet. And you can see a few moments in the movie where a single shot takes care of the entire scene. This is the moment where the bomb uses a ribbon to show Carlos where the ghost is. When he asks her, where is the ghost? And to me, the bomb, which in Spanish is a female, la bomba, you know, the bomb is like the iron mother of all these kids, the one watching over them. At the same time, a menace and a reminder of war. And the bomb becomes so many things. The bomb is such a powerful symbol. It symbolizes the impending doom. It symbolizes a crime from the past. It symbolizes the war that is outside, ticking quietly inside the building. You think the war's not here? Well, let me show you. I'm here. I live here. And this element of the bomb is used very ironically in the movie. You know, there is a moment in the movie where there is a huge explosion, obviously, but everything explodes except the bomb. The bomb remains untouched in the middle of the patio, precisely because at the end of Devil's Backbone, nothing has been resolved. Everything goes on. The evil outside and the pain inside continues, as again I will prove at the end. This is a very autobiographical little moment. I lived in my grandmother's house that had this central patio, much like the school, and these incredibly long corridors. And I wanted very much to, I needed to go to pee every night. And every night I had to walk barefoot these long, long corridors, and I dreamt of all kinds of apparitions. This is the first time you see the bones inside of the ghost, and the first time you see clearly the blood flowing out of his head. I wanted to create a ghost that was not like any ghost you had ever seen. I wanted a ghost that I considered beautiful, that I considered fragile. And one of the first things we did in doing this is I sent a memo to the special effects house, DDT is called, and I said to them, I want the kid to look like a broken porcelain doll. And they wrote back, and we talked on the phone, and they were saying, why are you doing this? It's going to be so strange. It's surreal. People won't understand why he looks like a broken doll. And frankly, what I believe is that in this, which is my favorite scene, one of my two favorite scenes in the movie, that this appearance of it would come to be worth it. Because I don't think a ghost needs to have any logic. They wanted to make him up like a rotting corpse, and I said that doesn't give you a sense of fragility. That is repulsive, grotesque. But the ghost to look fragile, you need those cracks on the face, and then they came back with a design that was full of cracks. The entire face was cracked, and I asked them to take out most of the cracks and just leave a few, a little one here, a little one there, and to add a sort of oxide tears, as if the porcelain was oxidized, and the ghost has two little tears falling, streaking down his face. You can see this is again a single shot, because I like in the movie for you to have a sense of geography, where the kitchen is, where the dining room is, where the patio is. So we know that the patio is behind us, and now we're going to go to the kitchen. This is very important because eventually the geography comes to play in the movie, and you have to know where everybody is. So here we see them going from the dining room to the kitchen, and then we pick them up. Here we are in the kitchen now. And the idea on this movie was to produce it, to make a co-production between Mexico and Spain. We tried for this movie to be nominated by Mexico to the Academy Awards, but we didn't have enough people working on it that came from Mexico, so we were not accepted by the Mexican Academy as a Mexican film, and the release of this movie was quite tragic in most of the world. The movie came out in America through the Toronto Film Festival. It was shown in the Toronto Film Festival September 9th, 2001, and it received amazing reviews and a great ovation. And I went back to Los Angeles very happy, feeling very strong. I had just shot Blade 2 and I was post-producing Blade 2, and I went back to Los Angeles feeling like the king of the world. And then September 11th, 2001 happened. And of course, everything I had to say about brutality and innocence and war and innocence and magic became obsolete. And out of that need, out of that discomfort, Pan's Labyrinth came out. I wanted to make a companion piece to this movie. Again, elements that echo each other. The egg, the cracked egg echoes the broken porcelain face of the boy, of the kid. And all these elements, the letters that she wrote to him when he was a kid and that she keeps in the safe, they will come to play once he opens the safe and finds them, and finds one photograph that defines him. I think that I'm very wary of the fact that we live in a world where we try to nuance excessively all the characters. I like to make my bad guys come out of a sense of fragility or a sense of weakness, from a weakness. And I think Jacinto is really full of rage, but I don't want to make him a good guy. I don't want to make him a nice guy that is forced to kill or he's forced to be violent. He's a guy that only articulates the world through violence. And that's all he knows, how to talk violence, and that's all he can hear, violence. And people say, well, there's no people, is he too much of a bad guy? Which is the same thing that they can say about Sergi Lopez in Pan's Labyrinth, but I don't think so. I think that it's just a guy with a very limited language, and the way he articulates the world is through violence. And here we see Dr. Casares, who is unable to finish anything in the movie. The professor is unable to make love and unable to fire his gun. When the time comes for him to act on things, he fails. The only promise he keeps in the movie is the promise that he makes to the kids that he will never leave that building. And this is where the Sergio Leone Western aesthetics of the film work beautifully. All these exteriors are almost out of a spaghetti Western, And this set is the exterior set. There's obviously nothing behind this facade, just the facade. And there's a funny, tragic story behind that facade, because we built it, as I said, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a plain, far away from Madrid. And 4 days before we shot it, I came with the producer to see the facade, and we didn't see it. We had visited just a week before, and now there was nothing there. And what happened is a tornado came in, and the tornado completely demolished that facade. Now, we were coming back 4 days after, and the builder, the guy that built the everything in the movie, all the sets, had only 4 days to rebuild a facade that had taken him almost a month to rebuild. And he made it shorter. He made it shorter about 5 to 6 meters. And when I arrived to see him, he was crying outside of the set saying, I have failed you and the producer, because I rebuilt the facade, but I rebuilt it shorter by 6 meters. Obviously, no one notices but him, And here, this is the magic of film for me. Here we are in Madrid, and now we are far away from Madrid in the other building, in the other facade. And how beautifully it cuts from one to the next, and how this take that follows captures that little dust devil gyrating by pure accident, the wind, right now. That is so beautiful. That's, to me, the magic of film, the moment you capture an accident like that. This sequence and other sequences like it are my favorite in the film. Sequences that require no dialogue. I have a particular hatred in shooting or writing any dialogue in the movies. I love movies where the camera, the music, the actor, they tell you the story. They tell you what is going on, how these things interlock, and the rhythm they create is purely cinema. Most people tend to think of a good film screenplay. They tend to think about a screenplay that, in my mind, is very theatrical, where people talk and talk and talk and talk about things. I love Hitchcock. I love the way he creates a universe that is purely cinematic, with his camera, with his music, with the colors, the textures, and the shapes. This movie was very carefully designed Again, we talk about ghosts being like insects trapped in amber. And the color palette for this movie, if you watch it carefully, is a very deliberate palette. We have everything is in amber, in very sandy greens, in very warm tones. There is no white. For example, the shirts, all the shirts of Jacinto, the caretaker, or the shirt of the old professor, they have been dyed to be a little more yellow. And we used two filters in this movie in front of the lens. We used a filter called chocolate and another filter called tobacco. And these filters annulled all the whites. I know that within the palette of the film that shirt is white, but it isn't truly. It is actually tinted. Now, if we were talking about insects trapped in amber, then the main color of the film needed to be that amber, sandy, amber, sepia, and that color, the amber color of this film, I used to call it amber days and green blue nights, also tried to echo the shape of the encapsulation of the insect in amber. We created most of the movie in the shape of arches. You can see arches most everywhere you look in the architecture of the building. Archways, round forms that encapsulate the characters, and in this is where I call, most people call beautiful things, they call them eye candy. And to me, in the films I do, I love to call it eye protein, because it actually has nutritional values. It actually is telling you the story as much as the screenplay is. To me, the color, the shapes, the movement, the camera, the music, all that is telling you the story as much as the screenplay and the anecdote is. And here comes my other favorite moment in the film. A moment in which we go back. We have this huge explosion, completely anti-Hollywood, because it ends with children being decimated and the piece of the car hitting the lens. And then we go to a completely subjective moment. I find this moment very beautiful, and I'm actually going to shut up so you can appreciate it. But it's pure camera and sound. This is subjective. The sound, since his eardrum has been blasted by the explosion and he cannot hear very well anymore, then the camera and the light and the sound become subjective. I love that moment in which we shot this scene at sunset, right on the moment where the sun was in the horizon, so that we could backlit that fire, and then backlit this fire here in the kitchen with the fire from the kitchen. Look at backlit this smoke. There is an eerie beauty, an eerie quietness to this moment. And I think this is an important element in my favorite horror films and my favorite genre films is beauty. People normally cannot understand the beauty of horror, but I think that this genre gives way, in the midst of all the horror and the violence, to moments of great fragility, of great humanity, of great sensibility, and that's why it's a gothic romance, because it also celebrates the fragility of humanity. It's not only death is what makes us human, choice is what makes us human, and these movies celebrate how incredibly fragile and painful it is to be alive. This moment always makes me cry. It never fails. And I love it because this guy is incapable of telling her he loves her even now. He has to use a poem to tell her as she is dying right next to him. He is still incapable of telling her just plain out, "I love you," you know. And it's such a great note for the character to be unable to do it. And the poem that he recites is Alfred Lord Tennyson's "In Memoriam." You know, one of the verses right around number 50, I think, is probably verse 50, if I'm not mistaken. And it's an incredibly moving, although very oblique, love poem. You know, and it's as you can see, it's a single take. You know, I try to not interfere with the actors. I leave them alone, and I just push in very slowly with the camera as he recites. Now, there's an interesting, funny story about this. We did the first take, and it didn't work. Second take didn't work. Third take, perfect. And we printed it, and then I check the tape. I check the take again, and I see one of the dead kids in the background racing up and watching the scene. And I go to the goddamn kid and say, "What the hell is going on with you?" And the kid says, "Well, I thought that my character was not dead. He was just injured, and he was curious to." And I almost strangled the kid. And this take, which is the next to last take, is the only other time the scene worked here. But it was not my favorite take. My favorite take was take number 3. This is what is in the movie, and I love it. But the other one was slightly more passionate, I think. I played them both back to back to a lot of people, and most people preferred this take. I still, perhaps because I cannot have it, I want it more. But I love the take 3. You know, the art director in this movie was Cesar Macarron. He's a Spanish guy, very imaginative. And the big problem we had was, as I said to you, we have 3 buildings compositing one single building. And one of the greatest challenges we had was to create an architecture, a very bizarre architecture that seemed to be cobbled together. In other words, you needed to get a sense of the romantic, the almost classical feeling of the pit, of the underworld. How that was the oldest part of the building. The kitchen and the dining room were the oldest parts of the building, and they had more rounded, more romantic, older feeling architecture, and then little by little evolved into the modern parts of the building. You know, now we come to a 4th setting, which is this. You know, the attic in the building was an attic nearby from where we shot the underground part. But again, if you looked outside that window, if you ever peeked outside the window in the set, you actually would have seen a school full of children playing, a street with tramways and cars, because we were in the middle of a small city. So every time we look out this window, every time you see the outside, that's another set, which is just about 3 meters of window and 3 meters of floor in the middle of the desert on the other set. Here we are in one place, and here we are in another place. And that's all you have. That's all the set you have. There is no ceiling, there is no more wall, and there is no more floor than what you see. The art directing of this is very carefully done by Cesar, and I love the fact that we were able to pull this off, that we were able to take all these similar buildings and put them all together and make them feel like one. You know, this is also this was, I think, my second movie with my director of photography, Guillermo Navarro. We started working together before Kronos, and we worked together again in this movie. I missed him. He's a great friend and a great collaborator, and I didn't use him on Mimic and I didn't use him on Blade, but I've used him in all the other films. And we have sort of a second nature, a very shorthand in ways to communicate. Guillermo's light is very intuitive and full of darkness. I always push him to keep most of the frame, or as much of the frame as possible, in the dark, because I think that there is a beauty to these figures emerging from the darkness. You can see all the arches in the architecture of the film in this sequence, and this is a crucial moment. It's the moment where we understand that the bad guy, quote unquote, Jaime, is also a victim. And if you watch the movie carefully, you'll see an exact same movement, camera movement, over the table in the present and in the past. And the only thing different is that I put a lot of very clean bowls in this scene in the past, so that you get a sense of prosperity in the school in the past, and a sense of famine in the present. This crime, it was extremely important for me that it was a crime of passion. This is also essential in the Gothic romance, that the crime in the past is a crime of passion. He kills this kid out of anger, out of absolutely lack of reason. He gets bitten and he pushes him, and it's an accident. The kid hits himself in the head, and that's why he's bleeding from the forehead. By the way, the kid trembling, if you go back, that's me holding the kid's hand out of the camera and making the hand tremble because the kid couldn't do it. There are several scenes in the movie where I had to go in for the close-ups and actually put my hand in the kid's back of the head and shake his head or move his head or shake his arm. Literally almost using them like puppets, unfortunately for them. There's another vile moment in this movie where Carlos asks the professor, "Do you believe in ghosts?" And he's shivering. You may recall that moment in the earlier on in the movie. And what do I do to cause that shivering? I put a pack of ice in his underpants. This is the Del Toro method of directing children. I should go to jail probably, but the kid. And by the way, we put this pack of ice in it, essentially next to his ass. The costume designer put this bag of ice, and he was shivering and looking really afraid. And there is another moment coming up later on where he's crying as he puts the handkerchief in the pocket of the dead professor. And, people ask me, how do you get that performance from the kid? Actually, after 3 takes, I pulled him aside and I said to him, you are a fake. You are not an actor. You fooled me. You fooled everybody into believing you were an actor, and you fooled us all. And he started to cry, and then I said, go ahead, let's roll the camera. And his tears are unfortunately real tears. Now, this moment and the exact movement that you just saw, the camera pulling back from the water and going over the shoulder of Jacinto, you will see that moment exactly, the exact same camera movement echoed later when they throw him in the water. Watch carefully a little later and I'll remind you of it. But again, this movie is about echoing one moment after the next to create a sense of rhyme. The bomb falling here is an echo of the opening again. There is an interesting story behind this bomb falling. We created a huge bomb, real size for the shot where it falls, and we did a hole in the water, a hole in the patio, filled it with muddy water. And as we were filming this shot, I asked the special effects guys to put actually a fake tip, a green tip on the bomb, because I said to them the sharp tip will break the water, and they refused to do it. They said no, the bomb is very heavy. And I said, no, you have to do it. I did special effects for 15 years. And I'm telling you right now, you have to put that fake tip for it to break the water, or it will bounce off the water. And they said, it's impossible for it to bounce. It's very heavy. I proceeded to explain to them the idea of surface tension, which actually causes very heavy objects to stay afloat, like ships. And they ultimately said, you want to be in charge, but we won't put the tip. And then I proceeded to torture them even further by asking them what caliber of cable they were using to guide the bomb, because it was essentially like an arrow trick. We were just guiding the bomb with a cable that ran from the ground to a crane that released the bomb. They told me the caliber of cable, and I thought it was too flimsy. Asked them to change it. They told me to screw off. And of course, that take that you see is the only take we did, because what happened? The bomb fell, the cable snapped, and the bomb bounced off the water. And I look at them and said, didn't I tell you? And they said, well, it had never happened before. So guys, the only lesson for directors is when you think you're right, stick to it. This scene is a scene that I find very important, because you have this guy killing her out of shame. He doesn't kill her out of hatred. He hates her. He kills her out of shame. He doesn't want his friends, his accomplices, to hear. He's so ashamed of her not doing what he wants that he rather kills her than to allow himself to be shamed by them. And here comes one of my favorite shots in the movie. The wide shot of this, where everything is kind of peaceful. I do a shot like this in Kronos, in the fight in the billboard, where you go from very extreme close-up violence to this. Now, let's talk a little bit about murder, and let's talk a little bit about violence. I agree with the Marquis de Sade when he says that he can understand a crime of passion, but he cannot understand a crime of reason. And that is essentially why I think war is such a perverse endeavor. When you kill a man out of passion, out of hatred, well, that's almost understandable. That's almost not forgivable, but you can understand it's human nature. Anger, hatred, cause a crime. What I cannot understand is that there is a law that allows a state to execute a human being. What I cannot understand is that there are certain rules of engagement that allow one man to kill another in war, in a war of religion or in a war of ideology. I find that to be truly, truly perverse, and I do not condone it. I agree with the divine Marquis that this is the only type of crime that is absolutely inconceivable, because it's absolutely perverse. It comes out not of a need, but of a desire, a choice to harm. And in the movie, I tried to show that with the fact that Jacinto and Jaime are different for one single reason. Jaime, the bully, made the choice to join the other kids and form a single group, while Jacinto decided to forever live his life as a separate man. Forever live his life as a guy that should have been, could have been a prince, could have been more. And I think that is the tragedy, that we can find ideology, we can find ideas that seemingly join us into a group or seemingly separate us, but it is only when we bond out of our weaknesses, when we accept our own weaknesses, that we can bond into a stronger group, into a complete human being. Now here comes the last movement of the film. I tried to punctuate the three movements of the film, the opening, the setup, the conflict, and now this. I tried to punctuate them with shots of the landscape, and try to show a little bit of how this movie starts evolving towards this tainted innocence, towards this final movement in which the kids will become essentially an adult. All of them together form an adult that walks into the nothingness, into the brutality of the landscape. I try, as we move more towards the film, I try to use more and more of the exterior of the building to punctuate this, to annotate it. Most of the second half of the film occurs indoors in a claustrophobic environment. And here more and more we start seeing the outside of the building, until the kids are finally released to that outside at the end. I used flies, and you can see that in the film. I use flies to represent Casares, the old professor, and to sort of be the messengers of death, of his impending death. You see them flying around him. You see them buzzing around him, walking on his face. And the first sign that he's dead is that his face is full of flies and he's not moving. And those flies will be used a little later to announce that he is back, that he has been resurrected, that he came back as a ghost. The moment in which he opens the door for the kids. It's a moment that is directly taken from the Stephen King's The Shining, which is the moment in which you have to wonder if the ghosts are real or not. Who opens the door? Who opens the door for Jack? Who allows him to come out of the fridge? And I think that in this movie, this ghost, the ghost of the professor, is announced, is heralded by the flies buzzing in, and you can hear them in the soundtrack. And later, we see his handkerchief on the floor covered in flies. Now, those flies are CG. And I think in some cases, in some of the shots, they're perfectly integrated into the film. In other cases, they're less fortunate. But I wanted very much to have them in the film because I happen to be in love with insects. I don't know why. But I love insects in my movies, and I wanted the flies to be this give this sort of prelude to Casares' arrival. This scene and the scenes that follow it is the moment in which the group fuses. Now, finding these kids, working with these kids and casting them was quite a challenge. You usually get the same rate. You get 100 kids in the casting room, and out of those 100 kids, you get one good kid for the part. For example, in the case of Carlos, the main kid, I had seen dozens and dozens and dozens of kids, and in comes this kid to read for the part. But to read for the part, he actually came in to read for the part of one of the secondary third kids, just a kid with one line. But I loved his appearance so much. I loved this sadness in his eyes so much that I asked him to read the entire one of the most important monologues in the movie, and he read it, and he was very fast, very easy to work with, and he got the part. It was his first movie. He had never done a movie before this, except as an extra or as a bit player or a background guy. This guy, on the other hand, Íñigo, who plays Jaime, was, by the time he did Devil's Backbone, he was already been in 2 or 3 movies, and he was quite an accomplished actor when we worked with him. I really enjoyed working with that kid, and I was very proud of one thing he said. He said I had taught him more about acting in this movie than his previous experiences, and I hope it was true. I really like him enormously, and I haven't seen him since, but he does a little part in Pan's Labyrinth, but I haven't seen him in a movie since Devil's Backbone playing any other part. I hope Spanish cinema recaptures him a little bit. This is a little brutal moment. You know, there you go. You know, I shoot everything in my movies. I don't do second unit. I don't give any of these moments to second unit. And this is a moment where I shot that foot breaking with an insert unit that worked after the main unit leaves. You know, I stay behind, and and work with them, with the plate unit, anything. I don't believe in anyone shooting anything if I'm not there. You know, so even the small things in my movies or the effects shots in my movies, I'm there to work on them, with very, very few exceptions. The camera work in this movie is really very sensuous. And here's the moment where the flies announce the arrival of Casares, as I told you. The camera work in this movie is beautiful. Guillermo and I talked about it from the beginning, and I said the camera needs to be constantly moving, pushing in, panning, dolling side to side with the characters. I didn't want the camera to be ever higher than the kids. You can see the camera is either at the height of the kid's eyes or lower than the kid's eyes. You know, but it's never or seldom, except with the crane or in the case of the bomb, the camera is always low angles. You know, here's the flies on the handkerchief. There you go, CG flies on a handkerchief. And the reason why I like this camera work is that I think the camera becomes an observer, an active observer, taking the audience to the most privileged point of the action. You know, a curious thing in this scene is that the guy on the right, next to the fat guy, he was, at the time of this movie, he was the head of the most important TV channel in Spain. And I met him for him to be an investor in the movie. And he comes in, and I'm talking to him about financing the movie, and I tell him, "You have such a hard face. Why don't you play one of the bad guys?" And that guy right there on the right, he was the president of the TV channel. Now this moment is very beautiful for me because it's the most human moment of this character, Jacinto, and it's the moment in which you understand him, both by the poem or the little inscription Carmen did on the photograph. Look at it. It's just a kid standing alone, completely alone in the beach. You know, it's a very sad encapsulation. It's a capsule of what this child's life was like. He was alone always. He was never part of the group, you know, and that's why he turned out the way he turned out. Now, the screenplay to this movie was co-written by me with two Spanish friends, David Muñoz and Antonio Trasorras. And the way this screenplay came to be is I wrote a screenplay called Devil's Backbone right after Kronos, and it took place during during the Mexican Revolution. And it was a very different story, but it contained some of the moments and stories that are contained both in Devil's Backbone and in Pan's Labyrinth, curiously enough. But I had a friend, Antonio Trasorras, who was a critic, one of the main critics in Spain. And we became very good friends, and he said to me, "Listen, I want you to read a couple of screenplays that I co-wrote with a friend, David Muñoz. And this is the worst moment in any director's life, when a friend that you love and cherish tells you, 'Could you read my screenplay?' Because, you know, usually they are shit. And you have to tell them they're shit. If you're their friend, that's your duty. You gotta say, you know what, you may hate me, but it's shit." And he gave me 5 screenplays. And I read 4 of them, and they were shit. They were crazy shit. Some good stuff here and there. And then I arrived to the 5th screenplay, which was called The Bomb. And it had the image of the bomb settled in the middle of an orphanage, in the patio of an orphanage. And I loved that image so much that I called him and I said, "Listen to me. Not only do I like your screenplay, but it's going to be my next movie. And I'm going to combine it with a screenplay I have called Devil's Backbone. And out of it will come out a a new story that we can do together. And I went to Spain. I moved there, and thanks to the Pedro Almodovar's company, El Deseo, we produced this movie that I literally think it saved my creative life. It really allowed me to survive the hardships of Mimic. This moment right here is what I call a very fairy tale moment, because it's the big bad wolf being drowned with stones by there's a story about the three little goats, not the three little pigs, the three little goats and the wolf, and how the mother of the little goats opens the wolf while the wolf is asleep, slits his belly, fills it with stones, and then they throw the wolf to the river and the wolf drowns, which is exactly the fate of Jacinto with the gold. I think that so many people echo or refer Lord of the Flies for this final moment. And I do adore Lord of the Flies, and I love the kids with the lances, but Lord of the Flies is about how a group disintegrates, how a group is fragmented by hatred and differences. And this movie is about a group coming together out of their fragility. I love this moment. I always like to create moments of pain that come from things that are not very common. I don't like to injure people in the chest, or the normal type of wounds that I call movie wounds. I always think, where would it hurt the worst? And that's what I go for. And this is another moment like that, because I think these are relatable injuries, if you would. Injuries that we all have suffered, a hit in the shin, things that are palpable. And this is an important moment because the kid has the gun, and the gun is loaded, but he is not going to kill this guy. He's just sending him to face the ghost. And this was an important difference. If you solved the movie by ultimately shooting the bad guy, then the movie has a bad resolution for me. It's about him meeting the kid he drowned. Now, shooting this scene, these underwater scenes, it took an entire day and a half, and the water there was freezing. So we could only shoot these scenes for 10, 20 seconds at a time. And the kid that appears in the pool is actually not the same kid that plays the ghost outside, because the kid that plays the ghost went in a couple of times and had an ear infection immediately. You see that movement? That's the exact same movement that I'm quoting when Jacinto threw the kid in the water. Go watch it again. And those scenes underwater were so complicated that when the time came to shoot an underwater scene on Hellboy, I required the special effects department to actually add the water after the fact and shoot it dry for wet. And this is the scene where I had to make him cry, and I told him he was not a good actor and that he had fooled us all and so forth. This is that moment of terrible cruelty. And now the movie goes back full circle to the opening monologue, but it has changed. It has gained new significance, and it defines what a ghost is by showing you that nothing was resolved. The ghost was not liberated. The ghost is still there, trapped in the pool. This is not a happy ending. The kids do not triumph and get the gold. No one gets the gold. The gold remains at the bottom of the pool with Jacinto. And the kids are left behind to carry on fighting and facing the world outside. Originally, this scene was supposed to be composed of 6 or 7 shots. But the moment we finished this shot, it was very inspired by John Wayne's and John Ford's The Searchers. The moment we finished this shot, I turned around and looked at my DP, Guillermo Navarro, and I told him, I think that's it. This is a much better ending. Why cut? I thought that with this shot, the scene was over. And so is the film. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. Bye.